You can eat something with a green check mark on the front of the label every single morning, feel completely fine, never gain a pound, and still be actively accelerating the aging of your arteries, your kidneys, and the collagen that holds your skin together, all because of a process that most nutrition labels will never warn you about. That process has a name. It is called glycation. And the reason your doctor almost certainly hasn't brought it up is not because it is obscure or fringe. It is because the foods driving it are the same foods the health food industry has spent 4 decades telling you to eat. By the end of this, I am going to walk you through what I call the anti-age swap. 3 specific changes that interrupt this process at the source. Not a diet, not a supplement stack. 3 targeted moves you can make this week with foods you already buy. But first, you need to understand what is actually happening in your body after 55, because without the mechanism, the swap is just another list. After 55, 2 things happen simultaneously that almost no one connects to each other. First, insulin sensitivity declines, not slightly, measurably. Research published in Diabetes Care found that postprandial glucose peaks, that is, the surge in blood sugar that follows a meal, increase significantly with age even in people who are not diabetic, have never been diagnosed with any metabolic condition, and whose fasting glucose looks completely normal on a standard blood panel. This means the same bowl of cereal, the same slice of toast, the same glass of orange juice that your body handled without incident at 35 now produces a larger spike, a longer elevation, and a slower return to baseline. You are not imagining the afternoon energy crash. You are not inventing the brain fog after lunch. Your blood sugar management system has genuinely changed, and the foods you were told are safe are hitting a different body than the one that received that advice. Second, you are losing muscle. Not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself in the mirror week to week, but approximately 1 to 2% per year after 50, according to research on age-related muscle loss published by the American College of Sports Medicine. By age 55, the average person has already lost 8 to 10% of the peak muscle mass they had at their most metabolically active. This matters because skeletal muscle is the primary tissue responsible for absorbing glucose from the bloodstream. Less muscle means your body has physically less capacity to clear a blood sugar spike. The glucose lingers, it circulates, and when glucose lingers in the bloodstream at elevated levels, it begins to react with the proteins and fats it encounters. That reaction is glycation. Here is the physical metaphor that made this click for me when I first read about it. Think of caramelizing onions on a stovetop. You apply heat, sugar is present, and over time those onions go from pale, flexible, and moist to brown, stiff, and sticky. That transformation is called the Maillard reaction. Now picture that same chemistry happening slowly, silently, without heat, inside your body every time blood sugar spikes and stays elevated. Your arterial walls, which should be elastic and responsive enough to expand and contract with each heartbeat, progressively stiffen. The collagen in your skin becomes cross-linked and inflexible. The crystalline proteins in the lens of your eye, and this one stunned me, literally caramelize over time, which is one of the primary mechanisms behind cataracts, not just a coincidence of aging. The technical name for the end products of this internal caramelization process is advanced glycation end products, which researchers abbreviate as AGs, which is, as scientific acronyms go, almost too accurate to be accidental. Dr. Helen Vlasara, who spent decades studying glycation at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York, found that dietary AGs, meaning glycation compounds that already exist in certain processed and cooked foods before you eat them, are absorbed into your body and add directly to your internal AG burden. You are not only generating them from blood sugar spikes, you are eating preformed glycation products that stack on top of the ones your own metabolism produces. Both pathways amplify after 55. There is a second villain working alongside glycation, and its name is inflammaging. This term was coined by researcher Claudio Franceschi in a paper published in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences in 2000. It describes the relationship between chronic, low-grade, persistent systemic inflammation and accelerated biological aging. Not the inflammation of an injury or an infection, which is sharp and self-resolving. The kind that hums at a low level for years, damaging cell membranes, shortening telomeres, the protective caps at the ends of your chromosomes, and quietly dismantling immune function. The two processes, glycation and inflammaging, are not separate problems. They feed each other. Glycation products trigger inflammatory responses. Chronic inflammation disrupts insulin signaling, worsening blood sugar management, which accelerates glycation further. It is a loop, and the 5 foods on this list are, in different proportions, fueling both sides of it. I will come back to this mechanism. Now the countdown. Number 5, and the one most people never suspect, is flavored low-fat yogurt. The word flavored in that phrase is doing enormous work, and most people read right past it. Plain yogurt, specifically full-fat Greek yogurt or skyr, is genuinely one of the better foods you can eat after 55. High-quality protein, real live fermented cultures that support gut bacteria and intestinal integrity, calcium, phosphorus, and a fat content that slows gastric emptying. None of that is marketing. The problem is that what is sold as yogurt in the health food aisle is very frequently not that product. It is a sugar delivery system wearing a yogurt costume, and the costume is convincing. Here is what happens when you remove the fat from a dairy product. Fat carries flavor. Without it, the product tastes flat, acidic, and entirely unlike what consumers will buy again. So manufacturers replace the missing fat with sugar, cornstarch, fruit concentrates, carrageenan, and in some cases artificial sweeteners. The resulting product can contain between 20 and 28 grams of added sugar per 6-ounce serving. To put that number in physical terms, that is more sugar than a glazed donut from a major chain donut retailer. You are eating a donut and calling it a health food, which is, and I say this with genuine admiration for the industry's creativity, one of the more elegant pieces of consumer misdirection in modern food marketing. But the mechanism that makes this specifically harmful after 55 goes beyond the total sugar number. The sugar in flavored low-fat yogurt is predominantly sucrose and, in many brands, high fructose corn syrup. Both break down into glucose and fructose. The glucose elevates blood sugar and initiates the glycation cascade we just described. The fructose, this is the part the label does not explain, bypasses the normal insulin-dependent glucose pathway and goes almost entirely to the liver. The liver processes fructose independently, converting the excess into triglycerides and very low-density lipoprotein particles. Research from the University of California, Davis, published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, found that even moderate fructose consumption, under the amounts found in several servings of flavored yogurt per day, elevated blood triglycerides, a major independent cardiovascular risk factor, within 2 weeks. At 55, with reduced liver metabolic efficiency and a cardiovascular system that is already managing age-related stress, that fructose load is not neutral. The swap requires almost no adjustment in routine. Plain full-fat Greek yogurt, minimum 15 grams of protein per serving. Add a small handful of fresh or frozen berries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, for sweetness. The fructose in whole berries arrives with fiber and water that slow absorption dramatically. The fat in full-fat yogurt further slows gastric emptying, so the sugar from the berries enters your bloodstream gradually rather than in a single wave. The fermentation cultures in a genuinely live culture yogurt support gut barrier integrity, which itself is a protective factor against systemic inflammation. Everything you were trying to get from the flavored low-fat version is in this swap, without the glycation accelerant. Number 4 is fruit juice. And I understand the resistance this creates because orange juice in particular carries a cultural mythology of vitality that has survived decades of contradictory evidence with remarkable tenacity. The core biological problem is straightforward. Juice is fruit with the most metabolically important component removed, the fiber. When you eat a whole orange, the fiber forms a physical matrix inside your digestive tract that slows the rate at which the fruit's sugars enter your bloodstream. The 12 grams of natural sugar in a whole orange arrive gradually, producing a modest and manageable insulin response. When you drink 8 ounces of orange juice, you consume approximately 22 grams of sugar, nearly double, with zero fiber, and those sugars reach your bloodstream within minutes. The glycemic response is functionally closer to a soft drink than to the fruit it was derived from. A study published in the British Medical Journal in 2013 tracked over 180,000 people across multiple cohorts and found that replacing 3 servings per week of fruit juice with whole fruit was associated with a 7% reduction in type 2 diabetes risk. That is not a marginal, barely detectable statistical association. That is a meaningful shift produced by one specific, achievable swap. Here is the layer that is specific to the 55-plus physiology. Your pancreas, which produces insulin, has been functioning for 5-plus decades. The beta cells responsible for insulin production experience cumulative stress over time, a phenomenon researchers describe as beta cell fatigue. A younger pancreas encountering a juice spike may release insulin efficiently and return blood sugar to baseline within 90 minutes. An older pancreas may respond erratically, sometimes overproducing insulin in a compensatory surge, which then drives blood sugar below a comfortable baseline and produces the hunger and lightheadedness that sends many people reaching for another snack 45 minutes after breakfast. The hunger you feel mid-morning after a healthy breakfast that included juice is not a character flaw. It is the predictable downstream consequence of a blood sugar event your breakfast created. There is also a timing dimension here that connects to the invisible villain. Cortisol, your body's primary stress and awakening hormone, peaks in the first 1 to 2 hours after waking. This is called the cortisol awakening response, and it is well documented in circadian biology research. Cortisol antagonizes insulin, meaning it actively reduces insulin sensitivity in the morning hours. So you are drinking 22 grams of fast sugar at the precise moment your body is least equipped to handle sugar. The blood sugar spike is higher, it lasts longer. The glycation opportunity is larger. This is one of the main reasons why, in my own eating pattern, I do not eat until noon. The cortisol peak has subsided, insulin sensitivity has improved, and whatever I eat first encounters a body in a meaningfully better metabolic state. The swap, whole fruit, especially low glycemic varieties. Berries have glycemic indices in the range of 40 to 50, compared to orange juice at 65 to 70. If the ritual of a morning drink is what you're attached to, and rituals matter, I'm not dismissing them, infused water with lemon, cucumber, or fresh mint gives you something intentional and flavorful, without any glycemic consequence. Number 3 is where this conversation gets genuinely uncomfortable for a lot of people. Number 3 is vegetable oil, specifically the industrial seed oils that have become the default cooking fat of the modern Western kitchen. Canola oil, soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil. The kind sold in large translucent plastic jugs, frequently labeled heart-healthy or cholesterol-free, and found in almost every processed food on the shelf. To understand why this is on the list, you need a brief timeline of how these oils came to dominate the food supply. Before the 1940s, the dominant cooking fats in most Western households were animal fats, butter, lard, tallow, and certain plant-derived oils like olive oil and coconut oil. Then the industrial food system developed processes to extract oils from seeds at high pressure and high temperature, using chemical solvents including hexane, a component of gasoline. These oils were cheaper to produce than animal fats, liquid at room temperature, shelf-stable, and critically, they were promoted as healthier alternatives to saturated fat, primarily based on research that has since come under significant scrutiny for the quality of its methodology and, in some cases, its funding sources. The biological problem is in the chemistry. Seed oils are predominantly composed of linoleic acid, which is an omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid. Omega-6 fats are not inherently harmful, your body uses them. The problem is ratio. Researchers studying evolutionary nutrition estimate that ancestral human diets had an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of approximately 4 to 1. The modern Western diet has a ratio estimated at 15 to 1, and in some populations closer to 20 to 1. Think of it as a recipe that calls for 4 parts of one ingredient and 20 parts of another. The chemistry of the final dish is entirely different from what the recipe intended. Omega-6 fats in excess are precursors to pro-inflammatory signaling molecules called eicosanoids. When this ratio is chronically imbalanced, The result is the persistent low-level systemic inflammation that Franceschi identified as inflammation. There is also a stability problem with seed oils that is completely independent of the ratio issue. Linoleic acid has multiple double bonds in its carbon chain, which makes it chemically fragile and prone to oxidation, meaning it reacts with oxygen. At room temperature, this oxidation is slow. At cooking temperatures, in a frying pan, in an oven, in the industrial manufacturing processes used to make packaged foods, the oxidation accelerates dramatically. The byproducts of this oxidation include aldehydes and lipid peroxides, compounds that are genuinely harmful at the cellular level. Research from the University of the Basque Country found that repeatedly heated vegetable oils produce levels of polar oxidation compounds well above safety thresholds recommended by the World Health Organization. And most home cooks use the same bottle of canola oil for weeks, reheating it many times over. This is the moment in this video where I need to name what the mainstream health establishment got wrong, specifically and factually. We have been told for approximately 50 years that saturated fat, found in butter, red meat, full-fat dairy, and animal fats, is a primary driver of cardiovascular disease. That guidance is traceable largely to Ansel Keys' 7 Countries study, published in the 1960s, which has been extensively criticized by researchers for selecting data from 7 of 22 available countries in a manner that supported a predetermined conclusion. A 2010 meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, which reviewed data from nearly 350,000 participants across 21 independent studies, found no significant association between saturated fat consumption and cardiovascular disease or coronary heart disease risk. Not a slightly reduced association, no significant association. The dietary guideline that drove a generation of Americans to replace butter with margarine and cooking fat with canola oil was built on a foundation that the evidence, evaluated rigorously and at scale, has not supported. I am not conspiratorially angry about this. I find it more instructive than infuriating. It illustrates exactly how institutional momentum works. A guideline gets embedded in public health recommendations, gets picked up by food manufacturers who build product lines around it, gets reinforced by decades of packaging and marketing, and by the time the meta-analyses arrive to complicate the story, the shelf space is already allocated, and the cultural habit is already formed. My husband went through his own version of this reckoning when his cardiologist laid out a treatment plan that was almost entirely pharmaceutical and almost entirely divorced from the dietary evidence that had been accumulating for a decade. That experience is what sent us both down the research rabbit hole, and 8 years later, under medical supervision and with consistent monitoring, he is managing without most of what he was initially told would be lifelong. I mentioned that not to make a claim about outcomes, results genuinely vary, and no one should adjust medication without their doctor, but to explain why I am personally allergic to the idea that the received wisdom is always right. The swap, extra virgin olive oil for most cooking applications. The Mediterranean diet's consistent performance in longevity and cardiovascular research is not mysterious. It is substantially explained by the replacement of inflammatory seed oils with oleic acid-dominant olive oil, which is chemically stable and carries a well-documented set of anti-inflammatory polyphenols. A 2018 meta-analysis in the journal Nutrients confirmed that olive oil polyphenols measurably reduce circulating markers of systemic inflammation, including C-reactive protein and interleukin-6. For high-heat cooking where olive oil's lower smoke point is a concern, avocado oil, also predominantly oleic acid, with a smoke point above 490 degrees Fahrenheit, is an appropriate alternative. These are not exotic products. They are in every grocery store. The barrier to this swap is habit, not access. Number 2. And this is consistently the one that generates the most resistance in comments and emails from my community, because it targets something that has been enshrined as the responsible adult alternative to junk food for the last 40 years. Number 2 is whole grain bread. What the mainstream health message got right: whole grain bread contains more fiber than white bread. That is true. The bran and germ present in whole grain flour do contribute some additional fiber and micronutrients. What the mainstream health message got spectacularly incomplete is the glycemic reality of the final product. The glycemic index of standard whole grain bread, the measure of how quickly and how high it raises blood sugar, is typically between 69 and 72. The glycemic index of white bread is between 70 and 75. Those numbers are so close as to be almost meaningless in practice. Your blood glucose does not read the ingredient panel. A study published in Cell Metabolism in 2017 by researchers at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel made this explicit in a controlled setting. They measured individual glycemic responses to white bread and whole wheat bread in a randomized crossover design. At the population level, there was no significant difference in blood sugar response between the two bread types. More interestingly, the individual variation in response was enormous. Some participants had markedly worse blood sugar spikes from whole wheat bread than from white bread, based on their personal gut microbiome composition and metabolic characteristics. The bread distinction that mainstream nutrition had built an entire dietary movement around turned out to matter far less than individual biology, and to matter almost equally poorly across the board. Here is what is happening in your body after you eat bread, any bread, at 55. The starch in the bread, regardless of whether it came from refined or whole wheat flour, begins to break down by the enzyme amylase the moment it contacts saliva in your mouth. Blood glucose rises within 20 to 30 minutes of eating. Your pancreas releases insulin. After 55, with reduced insulin sensitivity and less muscle mass available to absorb the glucose, the peak is higher and the return to baseline takes longer. That extended window of elevated blood glucose is extended time for glycation to occur. Every slice of toast you eat for breakfast, whole grain, brown, seeded, whatever the label says, extends the caramelization window in your tissues. There is also a contextual problem. Bread is almost never eaten in isolation in a way that would minimize its glycemic impact. It comes with vegetable oil-based spreads. It arrives at the sandwich counter loaded with processed deli meat, which we haven't even touched on today, and a side of fruit juice. The complete conventional healthy breakfast of orange juice, whole grain toast with a light spread, and a flavored low-fat yogurt is a delivery mechanism for 3 glycation accelerants served in a single sitting, none of which announces itself as a problem on the label, and all of which the supermarket and the food pyramid and the primary care physician have, at various points, encouraged. The psychological dimension of this one deserves a brief mention. Bread is deeply embedded in cultural identity, in hospitality, in comfort. I have watched people completely accept the case against juice and seed oils, and then resist bread with a disproportionate emotional intensity that is entirely unrelated to the nutrition. That is not a character flaw. It is how food identity works. The brain has tagged certain foods as home and normal and safe, and questioning them does not feel like a nutrition conversation. It feels like a threat to something more fundamental. Acknowledging that is not motivational language, it is just accurate. The anti-AG swap I will describe at the end accounts for this psychologically by not requiring you to give anything up without a replacement that satisfies the same function. The swap, authentic sourdough in moderate quantities, or legumes as your primary carbohydrate vehicle. Authentic sourdough, meaning bread made with wild cultures in a slow fermentation process of 12 to 24 hours, not commercial sourdough that is white bread with vinegar added for flavor, has a glycemic index of approximately 54, measurably lower than whole wheat, because the lactic acid produced during fermentation partially pre-digests the starch and lowers the overall glycemic load. A study published in Acta Diabetologica confirmed that authentic fermentation significantly reduces postprandial blood glucose compared to conventional whole grain bread. The challenge is that the word sourdough on a supermarket label guarantees nothing about fermentation time or process. For legumes, lentils, black beans, chickpeas, cannellini, the glycemic indices sit between 20 and 30, and the fiber-protein-starch matrix slows glucose absorption far more effectively than any grain product currently available. Before I get to number one, and number one is the most consequential item on this list, let me step out of the countdown for a moment. I had read about all of this. I had the studies bookmarked. I had understood the glycation mechanism well enough to explain it to someone else. And for a while, that knowledge still changed almost nothing in my daily routine, because understanding why a set of habits is harmful and building a workable daily structure to replace them are genuinely different cognitive tasks. My husband had actually figured out the structural piece before I did, and I will freely admit it took me longer than it should have to use what was sitting right in front of me. He had spent months after his health crisis building what became the Noon Reset Protocol, a 30-day daily companion, 2 pages per day, 1 page covering the science of what is happening in your body at that stage, 1 page of practical tracking. It moves through 4 phases: adaptation, activation, optimization, and acceleration, each one building on the metabolic shift the previous phase established. One of the sections I actually use is the break fast meals, 25 specific meal ideas for when you do eat, each one with exact protein counts, because after 55, getting sufficient protein in your first meal of the day is not optional if maintaining muscle is a priority. He also included a 40-question FAQ that covers most of the situations that derail people before day 10, which in my experience is the wall where most people quit any eating change. It's available through the link in the description for less than a restaurant meal. I'm mentioning it here, not at the end, because if you're eating bread and juice and flavored yogurt in the morning and you've been doing it for years, a list of 5 swaps is not the same thing as a structure that makes those swaps the default. That is what the protocol is. Now, number one. Number one is the category I am calling ultra-processed breakfast products. This includes boxed breakfast cereals of every variety, commercial granola, granola bars, flavored oatmeal packets, and protein bars marketed as meal replacements or healthy breakfast alternatives. This is the most consequential item on this list, not because any single serving is dramatically worse than any other food discussed today, though some servings come close, but because this category is the most pervasive, the most systematically misrepresented, and the most consistently consumed by people who are genuinely trying to eat well and believe they are succeeding. The numbers in this category are extraordinary. The Environmental Working Group analyzed over 1,300 breakfast cereals sold in the United States and found that 3/4 of them contain more sugar per serving than 3 Chips Ahoy cookies. Not 3/4 of the obviously sugary children's cereals. 3/4 of all cereals on the shelf, including the ones with whole grain banners, fiber claims, and heart health endorsements on the front of the box. A major brand of oat-based cereal that has carried a heart health claim on its packaging for years contains 11 grams of added sugar per serving and a glycemic response comparable to table sugar dissolved in water. The claim on the front of the box is technically defensible under FDA labeling rules. The metabolic reality of what the product does to your blood sugar is a different conversation. Granola is perhaps the single most elegant piece of nutritional camouflage in the modern grocery store, and I mean that as a complete sentence about marketing genius, not as an insult to anyone who buys it. It contains oats, which genuinely are a whole food with meaningful nutritional properties. It contains honey or maple syrup or brown rice syrup, which read as natural and therefore fine. It contains nuts and seeds, which are legitimately healthy. It contains dried fruit, raisins, cranberries, apricots, which sounds like fruit. And then it is baked at high heat with oil, usually canola, until golden and crunchy. Let's go through what the baking process has done to each of these components. The oats, which had a modest glycemic index in their whole cooked form of approximately 55, have been disrupted by processing and heat into a faster digesting starch. The honey and syrup have caramelized, which is literally the Maillard reaction, which is literally the glycation chemistry we've been discussing, creating dietary AGs before the food has even reached you. The canola oil, heated to baking temperatures, has begun the oxidation process that produces aldehydes and lipid peroxides. The dried fruit has had its water content removed, concentrating the sugar while eliminating the fiber and water matrix that slows absorption in whole fruit. 1 cup of commercial granola can contain up to 45 grams of total carbohydrates and over 400 calories. The word artisanal on the bag is not a regulatory category. The protein bar situation is worth a specific mention because it targets the 55 plus demographic explicitly with messaging about muscle maintenance, energy, and active aging. A standard commercial protein bar typically contains 20 to 30 grams of added sugar alongside its protein content, uses soy protein isolate or whey protein concentrate processed at temperatures that reduce bioavailability, and uses seed oils, sugar alcohols, and artificial sweeteners to achieve a palatability that real whole food doesn't need chemical assistance to achieve. The protein number on the label is real. The metabolic context in which it arrives, the sugar, the oxidized fats, the artificial sweeteners that some research suggests disrupt gut microbiome composition, is not part of the label. Here is the mechanism that makes ultra-processed breakfast products specifically more harmful than their nutritional label suggests. These products are not accidentally palatable. They are engineered with precision to override your satiety signals. Food scientists work with a concept called sensory-specific satiety, the property of a food that allows you to continue eating it past the point of physical fullness by delivering layered, complex sensory stimulation that your brain cannot habituate to quickly. The specific combination of rapidly digested starch, sugar, fat, salt, and engineered flavor achieves this in a way that whole foods, which tend to be sensorially simpler, do not. This is not a metaphor or an inference, it is a documented industrial design objective, a randomized controlled trial conducted by researchers at the National Institutes of Health, published in Cell Metabolism in 2019, offered participants either an ultra-processed diet or an unprocessed diet with nutritional profiles that were matched as closely as possible for total calories, sugar, fat, and fiber. Participants were told to eat as much or as little as they wanted. On the ultra-processed diet, participants consumed on average 500 more calories per day than on the unprocessed diet. The difference was not in willpower, not in intention, and not in the nutrients on paper. It was in the engineering of the food's interaction with appetite regulation. After 55, this overconsumption dynamic becomes more consequential because the hormonal systems governing appetite have shifted. Leptin, the hormone that signals satiety, becomes less effective as a biological signal with age and with accumulating body fat. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, tends to remain active even after caloric needs are adequately met. Ultra-processed breakfast products are interacting with a hormonal environment that is already tilted toward overconsumption. The 500-calorie daily surplus that the NIH trial measured can translate to a pound of weight gain every 7 days, compounding the visceral fat accumulation that itself worsens insulin resistance, which worsens blood sugar management, which accelerates glycation. It is a circle. The breakfast food is in the middle of it. And then there are the dietary AGs in the product itself, the pre-formed glycation compounds created by the industrial baking, toasting, and extrusion processes used to manufacture these foods. The golden crunch of a toasted granola cluster is a myod reaction product. The brown color of an extruded breakfast cereal flake is a myod reaction product. The caramelized surface of a granola bar is a myod reaction product. Dr. Vlasara's research group at Mount Sinai demonstrated that these dietary AGs are absorbed through the intestinal wall and add to the body's total glycation burden, measurably increasing inflammatory markers and vascular stiffness indicators. You are eating the caramelization before it even starts your blood sugar spiking. The swap here requires the most significant mental reframe of all 5 items on this list, because the question is not which breakfast cereal is the least harmful. The answer to that question is only marginally useful. The real question is what to replace the entire category with, and the answer for people over 55 is anchored in protein and in whole foods with minimal processing. Eggs are the most rigorously studied morning food for body composition maintenance, metabolic stability, and satiety in older adults. A whole egg contains 6 grams of complete protein with all essential amino acids, plus meaningful amounts of vitamin D, vitamin K2, vitamin A, choline, which is critically important for liver function and neurological health, and consistently underconsumed in modern diets, and a fat and protein combination that produces genuine satiety without any glycemic consequence. The glycemic index of eggs is effectively 0. There is no breakfast cereal that achieves this nutritional density. Studies from the University of Connecticut and from the Pennington Biomedical Research Center have found that egg-based breakfasts, compared to carbohydrate-matched breakfasts, produce greater satiety, lower subsequent caloric intake, and superior outcomes for body composition in overweight adults. If you are eating in a time-restricted window and not eating until noon, which is my approach and one I have found to be the most practically sustainable for the metabolic goals we've been discussing, then what you break your fast with is especially consequential. The body has spent hours in a low insulin state, drawing on stored energy, and the transition back to fed metabolism should be managed with foods that maintain insulin sensitivity rather than immediately spiking it. Breaking your fast with eggs, or with plain full-fat Greek yogurt and berries, or with a small amount of smoked salmon and avocado. These are foods that work in continuity with the metabolic state you have just spent 12 plus hours building. Breaking it with granola or flavored oatmeal or a protein bar immediately re-triggers the blood sugar roller coaster and substantially negates the physiological benefit of the fasting window itself. Now, the anti-AG swap. 3 components. The first component is called audit. Over the next 3 days, before you change anything at all, document every food you consume that falls into one of the 5 categories discussed today. Flavored low-fat yogurt, fruit juice, industrial seed oils, bread in any form, and ultra-processed breakfast products. Do not restrict, do not substitute yet. Simply see. Most people who do this exercise are genuinely surprised to find they are hitting 4 or all 5 of these categories before 9 in the morning, not because they are eating carelessly, but because the conventional health food environment is designed to route you toward exactly these products. The audit is not about creating shame. It is about data collection, because you cannot target what you have not seen clearly. The second component is gate. This refers to your eating window, specifically the choice to move your first meal to noon or later. The glycemic damage generated by the foods we have discussed is measurably amplified when those foods are consumed during the morning cortisol peak, when insulin sensitivity is at its daily low. Moving your eating window later does not require you to eat less total food or fewer total calories. It requires you to compress your eating into a window when your body's hormonal environment is better equipped to manage what you eat. Research from the Salk Institute and from the University of Alabama at Birmingham on time-restricted eating in adults over 50 has consistently shown improvements in fasting glucose, inflammatory markers, and blood pressure without changes in diet composition, only timing. Gating is not a replacement for swapping the foods. It is a multiplier on the swap's effectiveness. But if you can implement only one change this week, move the first meal to noon. The third component is exchange. Specific, one-for-one substitutions. Flavored low-fat yogurt exchanges for plain full-fat Greek yogurt with a small portion of fresh berries. Fruit juice exchanges for the whole fruit, or for infused water if the morning ritual is what matters. Industrial seed oils exchange for extra virgin olive oil in cold and warm applications, and avocado oil for high-heat cooking. Bread exchanges for authentic slow-fermented sourdough in modest quantities, or preferably for legumes as your carbohydrate source. And ultra-processed breakfast products exchange for eggs, prepared any way you find enjoyable, or for plain Greek yogurt, or for nothing at all if noon is your gate. The one common mistake that invalidates this protocol when people attempt it is doing the exchange without completing the audit. People swap the yogurt and retain the granola because the granola does not feel like a problem. Its health halo is intact. They eliminate the orange juice and keep the whole grain toast with canola oil spread and feel they have made meaningful progress while retaining 2 of the 5 items driving their AG burden. The audit is structurally necessary because the health food environment is specifically designed to make certain items feel categorically different from others when the metabolic mechanism driving the harm is identical across all 5. The glycation happening in your arteries today is not a sentence, it is a process, and processes can be interrupted. Research on dietary AG reduction, including intervention studies from Dr. Vlasara's group, shows measurable improvements in vascular flexibility and inflammatory markers within weeks of reducing Ag-generating and Ag-containing foods, not years. Your body is not static, it is continuously remodeling. New proteins are being synthesized to replace damaged ones. New cells are turning over. The question is whether you are feeding that remodeling with materials that work or with materials that accelerate the caramelization you are trying to reverse. If you are going to start the anti-AG swap this week, comment AG swap below so I can see who is actually doing this. And if you want to go deeper on what happens inside the cell when AG accumulation crosses a threshold your body can no longer clear, which is a conversation almost nobody is having in plain language, subscribe, because that is where we are going.